greatest fear and our only hope.
It's open season on all vampires.
Wesley Snipes, Stephen Dorff.
You're one of them, aren't you?
No, I'm something else.
Blade.
Yours truly, Brevin Thompson, is back, and now it's my birthday! So, for this video, I wanted to do something very special, because this is one maybe that's kind of been important to me since I was a kid, because this was one of the first few R-rated movies that my dad would let me watch back when I was a kid. I mean, there was like a few things that were like limited to me when it comes to R-rated movies, mostly in terms of content. But when it comes to Blade, it's something for me, alright? Before we discovered that mutants were the next stage of human evolution, before Peter Parker was bitten by a radioactive spider, and before the MCU became the pop culture phenomenon it was today and dominated the box office for years, Wesley Snipes killed a shit ton of fucking vampires in 1998, and it was badass. Now, when it comes to comic book movies that were released in the 90s, there was like a select few good ones from the 90s. I mean, we had Batman Returns and Darkman, but in the late 90s, most of them were terrible. I mean, you had The Phantom, you had the Batman movies by Joel Schumacher, and we had movies like Steel. Yeah, and Spawn. Yeah, it was kind of a mostly miss type of decade when it comes to comic book movies. So Blade was definitely something that the late 90s needed in terms of comic book films, and this kind of like helped like push forward the success of Marvel films, especially superhero films in general, because in the 70s, I mean, the superhero genre had like a lot of success when it came to Superman, and like 80s Superman 4 was that was the way they killed the franchise. And then we had Batman in 89, and that was successful. And then we had Batman Returns, which was also successful in 92. And then we had the Schumacher Batman films, and those were a joke. So Blade was definitely something that a lot of comic book fans really needed at the time, because this was one of the few films that took the source material seriously. Plus, it was it had an R rating, and they just go for that. I mean, when you have like a character like Blade or characters like Deadpool, I mean, those are the types of characters that require an R rating. So I'm glad that they definitely went for that. Collaborating with me is Sarah from Sarah of Horror, and I'm really excited to have her on this channel. She's very good. I mean, she mostly reviews horror films on her channel. I asked her to collaborate with me, and she said yes, and I am so happy to have her collaborate with me on this video. So before I discuss my thoughts on Blade, I want her to discuss her thoughts on the film. So, now to you, Sarah.
So hi everyone, and thank you so much to Brevin for letting me collaborate on this Blade review. And I have to say, it was a long time ago that I saw Blade for the first time. I really enjoyed it, so I just rewatched it, and I'm happy I did, because I had forgotten a lot of really cool and fun stuff about the film. So, firstly, I love the intro scene, where the guy goes to the club and the blood starts pouring up from the ceiling, like a blood shower, and he realizes, oh shit, this is not good. So I really enjoyed that part. And I do like the look and the feel throughout the rest of the film. They have kind of like a cold feeling, like kind of bluish, grayish, kind of dim feeling, and it suits the film really well. Also, Wesley Snipes did a really good job portraying Blade, and I do liked all the other characters that were helping him, and the chemistry between them, and also the evil bad vampires, very well portrayed, especially by Stephen Dorff. Really good, and it is quite bloody. And also Udo Kier, always fun to watch him in any film. And like there were a few just a few minuses, like some of the animation work or CGI kind of looked bad in some parts, but a lot of the blood looked good, and I did like the creative fighting scenes, very good, and I do like how they resolved everything, and the ending I think is really well thought out, and the script is very well written in my opinion. So I'm happy to have rewatched it, and I will give this an 8 out of 10. Definitely a really good vampire film. So if you haven't seen this, then I think you should watch it as soon as possible. And also here's my edition of the trilogy. Yes. So thank you for having me. It was fun reviewing this and also rewatching it. So hope you will all have an amazing evening. And I'm Sarah from Sarah of Horror. You can find me on Instagram, Sarah of Horror, or Sarah's Movie Collection. Thank you. Bye.
Blade was directed by Stephen Norrington and stars Wesley Snipes as the Daywalker Blade, a vampire hunter who has all the strengths of a vampire but none of their weaknesses, so he can walk around in broad daylight, but he does have a thirst for blood. Now, when it comes to the Blade trilogy, the first one and the second one were the ones that I watched the most out of the trilogy. Trinity I watched the least because that movie was shit. But it's kind of hard for me to decide which of the first two films I like the most. I mean, I like Blade a lot, and I like Blade 2 a lot. They're that badass. And the first in the trilogy I remember watching was Blade 2. And I don't remember watching Blade until I was at least 8 or 9 or at least 10 years old. It was right around there. And since then, I've always loved this character. And I love Wesley Snipes' betrayal of Blade. And honestly, I honestly can't picture anybody else pulling this performance as well as he did, because he is perfect as Blade. And I love Mahershala Ali, and I cannot wait to see what he does as the character. But he has big shoes to fill for Wesley Snipes because, like I said, he is perfect as Blade. And Wesley Snipes loved playing the character so much and was so dedicated to it, to the point where he actually did press interviews while in character. And it's amazing.
Playing a comic book character is the best of all worlds, because anything goes. Create a different voice, create a different look, different sound, different way of moving with the talking. All the stuff very different from Wesley.
One reason why I think Blade holds up all these years later is because a lot of the fight sequences are done in camera, and Wesley Snipes is so badass throughout all of these sequences, mostly with him being a master at both karate and hapkido. He rarely has a stunt double for for these fight sequences, and it's just, I could watch these all day and never get tired of them. They are not boring at all. It's just such badassness, and you're just like, God, give us more of this, please. Blade, however, is not perfect. It does have its flaws, mostly when it comes to certain characters, and there is some dated CGI for sure. Here's an example.
You're too late, Blade.
So when you see effects like that, you're like, all of a sudden I just put on a Saturday morning cartoon. Like, what the hell is this? And when it comes to the scene at the rave where we see this guy just having some fun at first and he thinks that he's about to have sex or and all this stuff, then the sprinklers go off and blood starts spraying all over these vampires, and he realizes that he's now about to be fed upon by a bunch of vampires. And he's just like, oh shit, I better get out of here. Now, when it comes to stuff like that, that brings out the horror element of the film. But when Blade enters the club, you realize that these vampires are horrified of him, and when it gets to him just tearing ass through all these vampires, and it's really badass. I mean, this kind of, I mean, from beginning to end, when it comes to this film, I mean, sure, I mean, it does have its horror elements and everything. I mean, in some cases, it can be scary. I mean, especially if kids watch this movie. I mean, honestly, I mean, I would recommend if kids would watch this on like TNT or AMC or something like that. But mostly when it comes to the fight scenes alone and just watching Blade just tear ass through all these vampires, it's just... It's just badass. Then when we get to the scene in the hospital where the vampire Quinn bites a hematologist, Dr. Karen Jensen, who's played by Nebuchadnezzar Wright, Blade tries to kill him, but instead ends up cutting off his arm. He gets away, so Blade saves Karen and takes her to Whistler, played by Kris Kristofferson. And I've always loved Kris Kristofferson as Whistler. And when it comes to him and Blade's relationship, it's clearly father and son, because, I mean, not only is Whistler his mentor and weaponsmith, he's basically a surrogate father to him. And when it comes to the halfway point in the film when Deacon Frost and his men wound him and leave him for dead, and when Blade comes back to his lair, and the scene where he sees Whistler covered up by a bloody sheet, he can barely look at him. He slowly removes the sheet, and it just reveals Whistler's bloody remains. And it's heartbreaking. Now, when it comes to Stephen Dorff's villain, Deacon Frost, he's decent. I mean, I do think he's basically your stereotypical bad guy. I mean, he's just a vampire who is obsessed with world domination. It's kind of like the basic type of villain. So his ultimate goal is to capture Blade and use him for a ritual that will make him a vampire god. And when the ritual takes place in this temple, and once the lightning strikes on these vampires, they have, and I'm not making this up, tiny skeletons just popping out after lightning hits them for a significant amount of time, and they have fucking wings. I am not making this shit up. This is not, I mean, I'm not downgrading this movie just for that. I mean, I think it's funny for all the wrong reasons. And the final fight between Blade and Frost, I mean, it's got its good, it's got its bad. I mean, I wouldn't say that the third act is disappointing or anything. I mean, most of the third act, I mean, it's really badass, especially when you see Blade just kicking ass left and right. And one point he rips a dude's throat out and throws it at another guy. That's really creative. And so how Blade kills Frost, he injects him with various vials of EDTA, substance that would make a vampire's body explode. And the effects used to accomplish this, they are very weak. I mean, some of the effects, I mean, some of them hold up, some not so much, and it's almost to the point where it can be a bit mediocre. I mean, still, I mean, I think this movie is pretty well made overall. And this was supposed to be the original ending. the original final conflict between Blade and Frost.
You're too late, Blade. The sleeper has awakened. You want my blood so much? Take it!
So, Frost becoming this giant mass of blood, this was the original ending, and I'm glad that they chose to make to stick with the ending that they used for the theatrical cut, because I'm pretty sure if they released this in theaters, I mean, a lot of people would have just checked out, because the effects in this moment, and this alternate ending, are fucking hilariously bad. But still, I'm happy to say that I still like Blade all these years later, and not only is this a very underrated comic book film for most people, I mean, it's really badass. It's one I highly recommend if anybody is a fan of Marvel or comic book movies in general. And it's one movie that you can just have a blast with. I mean, watch it with a few friends and they'll be like, damn, this is really good. I own this on 4K and I have a VHS tape for this film, so that's how much I love Blade. I'm gonna give Blade a B+. So this is one I highly recommend, like I mentioned, if you are a fan of comic book films in general, because I feel like this is very underrated. And on a side note, I mean, a lot of people consider Black Panther to be Marvel's first black lead, when Blade did it 20 years before Black Panther. And that's just like, how do you sleep at night, internet? How do you sleep at night? Guys, thank you so much as always for watching. I'm looking forward to doing more videos really soon. If you send me like tons of birthday wishes today, I mean, I'm just like, thank you guys. You are the best. I love you. And if you want my thoughts on old or new movies, of course, you know where to find me. And a huge thank you for Sarah of Horror for collaborating with me on Blade. Thank you so much for that.